Beyond the City by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 7. Venit, Tandem, Felicitas. It was just 3 days after the doctor and the admiral had congratulated each other upon the closer tie which was to unite their two families, and to turn their friendship into something even dearer and more intimate, that Miss Ida Walker received a letter which caused her some surprise and considerable amusement. It was dated from next door, and was handed in by the red-headed page after breakfast. "Dear Miss Ida," began this curious document, and then relapsed suddenly into the third person. "Mr. Charles Westmacott hopes that he may have the extreme pleasure of a ride with Miss Ida Walker upon his tandem tricycle. Mr. Charles Westmacott will bring it round in half an hour. You in front. Yours very truly, Charles Westmacott." The whole was written in a large, loose-jointed, and schoolboyish hand, very thin on the upstrokes and thick on the down, as though care and pains had gone to the fashioning of it. Strange as was the form, the meaning was clear enough. So Ida hastened to her room, and had hardly slipped on her light grey cycling dress when she saw the tandem with its large occupant at the door. He handed her up to her saddle with a more solemn and thoughtful face than was usual with him. A few moments later they were flying along the beautiful, smooth suburban roads in the direction of Forest Hill. The great limbs of the athlete made the heavy machine spring and quiver with every stroke, while the minion grey figure with the laughing face and the golden curls blowing from under the little pink-banded straw hat simply held firmly to her perch, and let the treadles whirl round beneath her feet. Mile after mile they flew, the wind beating in her face, the trees dancing past in two long ranks on either side, until they had passed round Croydon, and were approaching Norwood once more from the further side. "Aren't you tired?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder, and turning towards him a little pink ear, a fluffy golden curl, and one blue eye twinkling from the very corner of its lid. "Not a bit. I am just getting my swing." "Isn't it wonderful to be strong? You always remind me of a steam engine." "Why a steam engine?" "Well, because it is so powerful and reliable and unreasoning. Well, I didn't mean that last, you know, but you know what I mean. What is the matter with you?" "Why?" "Because you have something on your mind. You have not laughed once." He broke into a gruesome laugh. "I am quite jolly," said he. "Oh, no, you are not. And why did you write me such a dreadfully stiff letter?" "There now," he cried. "I was sure it was stiff. I said it was absurdly stiff." "Then why write it?" "It wasn't my own composition." "Whose, then? Your aunt's?" "Oh, no. It was a person of the name of Slattery." "Goodness! Who is he?" "I knew it would come out. I felt it would. You've heard of Slattery, the author?" "Never." "He is wonderful at expressing himself. He wrote a book called The Secret Solved, or Letter Writing Made Easy. It gives you models of all sorts of letters." Ida burst out laughing. "So you actually copied one?" "It was to invite a young lady to a picnic, but I set to work and soon got it changed so that it would do very well. Slattery seems never to have asked anyone to ride a tandem, but when I'd written it, it seemed so dreadfully stiff that I had to put a little beginning and end of my own, which seemed to brighten it up a good deal." "I thought there was something funny about the beginning and end." "Did you? Fancy your noticing the difference in style. How quick you are! I am very slow at things like that. I ought to have been a woodman or gamekeeper or something. I was made on those lines, but I have found something now." "What is it, then?" "Ranching. I have a chum in Texas, and he says it's a rare life. I am to buy a share in his business. It is all in the open air, shooting and riding and sport. Would it inconvenience you much, Ida, to come out there with me?" Ida nearly fell off her perch in her amazement. The only words of which she could think were, "My goodness me." So she said them. "If it would not upset your plans or change your arrangements in any way." He had slowed down and let go of the steering handle, so that the great machine crawled aimlessly about from one side of the road to the other. "I know very well that I am not clever or anything of that sort, but still I would do all I can to make you very happy. Don't you think that in time you might come to like me a little bit?" Ida gave a cry of fright. "I won't like you if you run me against a brick wall," she said, as the machine rasped up against a curb. "Do attend to the steering." "Yes, I will. But tell me, Ida, whether you will come with me." "Oh, I don't know. It's too absurd. How can we talk about such things when I cannot see you? You speak to the nape of my neck, and then I have to twist my head round to answer." "I know. That was why I put you in front upon my letter. I thought that it would make it easier. But if you would prefer it, I will stop the machine, and then you can sit round and talk about it."
"Good gracious!" cried Ida. "Fancy our sitting face to face on a motionless tricycle in the middle of the road, and all the people looking out of their windows at us."
"It would look rather funny, wouldn't it? Well then, suppose that we both get off and push the tandem along in front of us."
"Oh no, this is better than that."
"Or I could carry the thing."
Ida burst out laughing. "That would be more absurd still."
"Then we will go quietly, and I will look out for the steering. I won't talk about it at all if you would rather not, but I really do love you very much, and you would make me very happy if you came to Texas with me, and I think that perhaps after a time I could make you happy too."
"But your aunt—"
"Oh, she would like it very much. I can understand that your father might not like to lose you. I'm sure I wouldn't either if I were he. But after all, America is not very far off nowadays, and it is not so very wild. We would take a grand piano and a copy of Browning, and Denver and his wife would come over to see us. We should be quite a family party. It would be jolly."
Ida sat listening to the stumbling words and awkward phrases which were whispered from the back of her. But there was something in Charles Westmacott's clumsiness of speech which was more moving than the words of the most eloquent of pleaders. He paused, he stammered, he caught his breath between the words, and he blurted out in little blunt phrases all the hopes of his heart. If love had not come to her yet, there was at least pity and sympathy, which are nearly akin to it. Wonder there was also that one so weak and frail as she should shake this strong man so, should have the whole course of his life waiting for her decision. Her left hand was on the cushion at her side. He leaned forward and took it gently in his own. She did not try to draw it back from him.
"May I have it?" said he. "For life?"
"Oh, do attend to your steering," said she, smiling round at him. "And don't say any more about this today. Please, don't."
"When shall I know, then?"
"Oh, tonight, tomorrow. I don't know. I must ask Clara. Talk about something else."
And they did talk about something else, but her left hand was still enclosed in his, and he knew, without asking again, that all was well. End of chapter. Read by Fadi Akhtar for Lit2Go, on the web at fcit.usf.edu. Beyond the City by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 8, Shadows Before. Mrs. Westmacott's great meeting for the enfranchisement of woman had passed over, and it had been a triumphant success. All the maids and matrons of the southern suburbs had rallied at her summons. There was an influential platform with Dr. Balthazar Walker in the chair, and Admiral Hay Denver among his more prominent supporters. One benighted male had come in from the outside darkness and had jeered from the further end of the hall, but he had been called to order by the chair, petrified by indignant glances from the unenfranchised around him, and finally escorted to the door by Charles Westmacott. Fiery resolutions were passed, to be forwarded to a large number of leading statesmen, and the meeting broke up with the conviction that a shrewd blow had been struck for the cause of woman. But there was one woman at least to whom the meeting and all that was connected with it had brought anything but pleasure. Clara Walker watched with a heavy heart the friendship and close intimacy which had sprung up between her father and the widow. From week to week it had increased until no day ever passed without their being together. The coming meeting had been the excuse for these continual interviews, but now the meeting was over, and still the doctor would refer every point which rose to the judgment of his neighbor. He would talk, too, to his two daughters of her strength, of character, her decisive mind, and of the necessity of their cultivating her acquaintance,
and following her example, until at last it had become his most common topic of conversation. All this might have passed as merely the natural pleasure which an elderly man might take in the society of an intelligent and handsome woman, but there were other points which seemed to Clara to give it a deeper meaning. She could not forget that when Charles Westmacott had spoken to her one night, he had alluded to the possibility of his aunt marrying again. He must have known or noticed something before he would speak upon such a subject. And then again, Mrs. Westmacott had herself said that she hoped to change her style of living shortly and take over completely new duties. What could that mean except that she expected to marry? And whom? She seemed to see few friends outside their own little circle. She must have alluded to her father. It was a hateful thought, and yet it must be faced. One evening the doctor had been rather late at his neighbor's. He used to go into the Admiral's after dinner, but now he turned more frequently in the other direction. When he returned, Clara was sitting alone in the drawing-room reading a magazine. She sprang up as he entered, pushed forward his chair, and ran to fetch his slippers. "You are looking a little pale, dear," he remarked.
No, Papa, I am very well.
"All well with Harold?"
Yes, his partner, Mr. Pearson, is still away, and he is doing all the work."
"Well done. He is sure to succeed. Where is Ida?"
"In her room, I think."
"She was with Charles Westmacott on the lawn not very long ago. He seems very fond of her. He is not very bright, but I think he will make her a good husband."
"I am sure of it, Papa. He is very manly and reliable."
"Yes, I should think that he is not the sort of man who goes wrong. There is nothing hidden about him. As to his brightness, it really does not matter, for his aunt, Mrs. Westmacott, is very rich, much richer than you would think from her style of living, and she has made him a handsome provision."
"I am glad of that."
"It is between ourselves. I am a trustee, and so I know something of her arrangements. And when are you going to marry Clara?"
"Oh, Papa, not for some time yet. We have not thought of a date."
"Well, really, I don't know that there is any reason for delay. He has a competence, and it increases yearly. As long as you are quite certain that your mind is made up—"
"Oh, Papa—"
"Well, then, I really do not know why there should be any delay. And Ida, too, must be married within the next few months. Now, what I want to know is what I am to do with my little two companions run away from me."
He spoke lightly, but his eyes were grave as he looked questioningly at his daughter. "Dear Papa, you shall not be alone. It will be years before Harold and I think of marrying, and when we do, you must come and live with us."
"No, no, dear. I know that you mean what you say, but I have seen something of the world, and I know that such arrangements never answer. There cannot be two masters in a house, and yet at my age my freedom is very necessary to me."
"But you would be completely free."
"No, dear, you cannot be that if you are a guest in another man's house. Marriage, however, should be an equal partnership, as she points out. I should wish you both to marry, but still I should like a suggestion from you, Clara, as to what I should do."
"But there is no hurry, Papa. Let us wait. I do not intend to marry yet."
Dr. Walker looked disappointed. "Well, Clara, if you can suggest nothing, I suppose that I must take the initiative myself," said he.
"Then what do you propose, Papa?"
She braced herself as one who sees the blow which is about to fall. He looked at her and hesitated. "How like your poor dear mother you are, Clara," he cried. "As I looked at you then, it was as if she had come back from the grave." He stooped towards her and kissed her. "There, run away to your sister, my dear, and do not trouble yourself about me. Nothing is settled yet, but you will find that all will come right." Clara went upstairs, sad at heart, for she was sure now that what she had feared was indeed about to come to pass, and that her father was going to take Mrs. Westmacott to be his wife. In her pure and earnest mind, her mother's memory was enshrined as that of a saint, and the thought that anyone should take her place seemed a terrible desecration. Even worse, however, did this marriage appear when looked at from the point of view of her father's future. The widow might fascinate him by her knowledge of the world, her dash, her strength, her unconventionality, but all these qualities Claire was willing to allow her. But she was convinced that she would be unendurable as a life companion. She had come to an age when habits are not likely to be changed, nor was she a woman who was at all likely to attempt to change them. How would a sensitive man like her father stand the constant strain of such a wife, a woman who was all decision with no softness and nothing soothing in her nature? It passed as a mere eccentricity when they heard of her stout drinking, Her cigarette smoking, her occasional whiffs at a long clay pipe, her horse-whipping of a drunken servant, and her companionship with the snake Eliza, whom she was in the habit of bearing about in her pocket. All this would become unendurable to her father when his first infatuation was past. For his own sake, then, as well as for her mother's memory, this match must be prevented. And yet how powerless she was to prevent it. What could she do? Could Harold aid her? Perhaps. Or Ida? At least she would tell her sister and see what she could suggest. Ida was in her boudoir, a tiny little tapestried room as neat and dainty as herself, with low walls hung with Imari plaques, and with pretty little Swiss brackets bearing blue Kaga ware, or the pure white Colport china. In a low chair beneath her red-shaded standing lamp sat Ida, in the diaphanous evening dress of mousseline de soie, the ruddy light tinging her sweet childlike face and glowing on her golden curls. She sprang up as her sister entered and threw her arms around her. "Dear old Clara, come and sit down here beside me. I have not had a chat for days. But oh, what a troubled face! Oh, what is it, then?" She put up her forefinger and smoothed her sister's brow with it. Clara pulled up a stool and, sitting down beside her sister, passed her arm round her waist. "I am so sorry to trouble you, dear Ida," she said, "but I do not know what to do. There's nothing the matter with Harold. Oh, no, Ida. Nor with my Charles. No, no." Ida gave a sigh of relief. "You quite frightened me, dear," said she. "You can't think how solemn you look. What is it, then?" "I believe that Papa intends to ask Mrs. Westmacott to marry him." Ida burst out laughing. "What can have put such a notion in your head, Clara?" "It is only true, Ida. I suspected it before, and he himself almost told me as much with his own lips tonight. I don't think that it is a laughing matter. Really, I could not help it. If you had told me that those two dear old ladies opposite the Mrs. Williams were both engaged, you would not have surprised me more. It is really too funny." "Funny, Ida? Think of anyone taking the place of dear mother." But her sister was of a more practical and less sentimental nature. "I am sure," said she, "that dear mother would like Papa to do whatever would make him most happy. We shall both be away, and why should Papa not please himself? But think how unhappy he will be. You know how quiet he is in his ways, and how even a little thing will upset him. How could he live with a wife who would make his whole life a series of surprises? Fancy what a whirlwind she must be in a house. A man at his age cannot change his ways. I am sure he would be miserable." Ida's face grew graver, and she pondered over the matter for a few minutes. "I really think that you are right, as usual," said she at last. "I admire Charlie's aunt very much, you know, and I think that she is a very useful and good person, but I don't think she would do as a wife for poor, quiet Papa. But he certainly will ask her, and I really think that she intends to accept him. Then it would be too late to interfere. We have only a few days at the most, and what can we do? How can we hope to make him change his mind?" Again Ida pondered. "He has never tried what it is to live with a strong-minded woman," said she. "If we could only get him to realize it in time— Oh, Clara, I have it! I have it! Such a lovely plan!" She leaned back in her chair and burst into a fit of laughter so natural and so hearty that Clara had to forget her troubles and to join in it. "Oh, it is beautiful," she gasped at last. "Poor Papa! What a time he will have! But it's all for his own good, as he used to say when we had to be punished when we were little. Oh, Clara, I do hope your heart won't fail you." "I would do anything to save him, dear." "That's it. You must steel yourself by that thought." "But what is the plan?" "Oh, I am so proud of it. We will tire him forever of the widow, and of all emancipated women. Let me see. What are Mrs. Westmacott's main ideas? You have listened to her more than I. Women should attend less to household duties. That is one, is it not?" "Yes, if they feel they have capabilities for higher things. Then she thinks that every woman who has leisure should take upon the study of some branch of science, and that as far as possible every woman should qualify herself for some trade or profession, choosing for preference those which have been hitherto monopolized by men. To enter the others would only be to intensify the present competition." "Quite so. That is glorious." Her blue eyes were dancing with mischief, and she clapped her hands in her delight. "What else? She thinks that whatever a man can do, a woman should be allowed to do also. Does she not?" "She says so." "And about dress, the short skirt and the divided skirt are what she believes in." "Yes." "We must get in some cloth." "Why?" We must make ourselves a dress each, a brand new enfranchised, emancipated dress, dear. Don't you see my plan? We shall act up to all Mrs. Westmacott's views in every respect, and approve them when we can. Then Papa will know what it is to live with a woman who claims all her rights. Oh, Clara, it will be splendid."
Her milder sister sat speechless before so daring a scheme.
"But it would be wrong, Ida," she cried at last. "Not a bit. It is to save him. I should not dare." "Oh, yes, you would. Harold will help. Besides, what other plan have you?" "I have none." "Then you must take mine." "Yes, perhaps you are right. Well, we can do it for a good motive." "You will do it?" "I do not see any other way." "You dear good Clara. Now I will show you what you ought to do. We must not begin too suddenly. It might excite suspicion." "What would you do, then?" "Tomorrow we must go to Mrs. Westmacott and sit at her feet and learn all her views. What hypocrites we shall feel! We shall be her newest and most enthusiastic converts. Oh, it will be such fun, Clara. Then we shall make our plans and send for what we want and begin our new life. I do hope that we shall not have to keep it up long. It seems so cruel to dear Papa." "Cruel? To save him? I wish I were sure that we were doing right. And yet, what else can we do? Well then, Ida, the die is cast, and we will call upon Mrs. Westmacott tomorrow."
End of chapter. Read by Fadi Akhtar for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. Beyond the City by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 9. A Family Plot. Little did poor Dr. Walker imagine, as he sat at his breakfast table next morning, that the two sweet girls who sat on either side of him were deep in a conspiracy, and that he, munching innocently at his muffins, was the victim against whom their wiles were planned. Patiently they waited until at last their opening came. "It is a beautiful day," he remarked. "It will do for Mrs. Westmacott. She was thinking of having a spin upon the tricycle."
"Then we must call early. We both intended to see her after breakfast."
"Oh, indeed." The doctor looked pleased.
"You know, Pa," said Ida, "it seems to us that we really have a very great advantage in having Mrs. Westmacott living so near."
"Why so, dear?"
"Well, because she is so advanced, you know. If we only study her ways, we may advance ourselves also." "I think I've heard you say, Papa," Clara remarked, "that she is a type of the woman of the future."
"I am very pleased to hear you speak so sensibly, my dears. I certainly think that she is a woman whom you may very well take as your model. The more intimate you are with her, the better pleased I shall be."
"Then it is settled," said Clara demurely, and the talk drifted to other matters.
All the morning the two girls sat extracting from Mrs. Westmacott her most extreme view as to the duty of the one sex and the tyranny of the other. Absolute equality, even in details, was her ideal. Enough of the parrot cry of unwomanly and unmaidenly. It had been invented by man to scare woman away when she poached too nearly upon his precious preserves. Every woman should be independent. Every woman should learn a trade. It was their duty to push in where they were least welcome. Then they were martyrs to the cause, and pioneers to their weaker sisters. Why should the wash-tub, the needle, and the housekeeper's book be eternally theirs? Might they not reach higher, to the consulting-room, to the bench, and even to the pulpit? Mrs. Westmacott sacrificed her tricycle ride in her eagerness over her pet subject, and her two fair disciples drank in every word, and noted every suggestion for future use. That afternoon they went shopping in London, and before evening strange packages began to be handed in at the doctor's door. The plot was ripe for execution, and one of the conspirators was merry and jubilant, while the other was very nervous and troubled. When the doctor came down to the dining-room next morning, he was surprised to find that his daughters had already been up some time. Ida was installed at one end of the table with a spirit lamp, a curved glass flask, and several bottles in front of her. The contents of the flask were boiling furiously, while a villainous smell filled the room. Clara lounged in an armchair with her feet upon a second one, a blue-covered book in her hand, and a huge map of the British Islands spread across her lap. "Hello!" cried the doctor, blinking and sniffing. "Where's the breakfast?"
"Oh, didn't you order it?"
asked Ida. I? No, why should I?" He rang the bell. "Why have you not laid the breakfast, Jane?"
If you please, sir, Miss Ida was a-working at the table.
Oh, of course, Jane, said the young lady calmly. I am so sorry. I shall be ready to move in a few minutes.
But what on earth are you doing, Ida? Asked the doctor. The smell is most offensive. And good gracious, look at the mess which you have made upon the cloth. Why, you have burned a hole right through.
Oh, that is the acid, Ida answered contentedly. Mrs. Westmacott said that it would burn holes.
You might have taken her word for it without trying, said her father dryly.
But look here, Pa. See what the book says. The scientific mind takes nothing upon trust. Prove all things. I have proved it.
You certainly have. Well, until breakfast is ready, I'll glance over the Times. Have you seen it?
The Times? Oh, dear me. This is which I have under my spirit lamp. I am afraid there is some acid upon that too, and it is rather damp and torn. Here it is.
The doctor took the bedraggled paper with a rueful face. Everything seems to be wrong today, he remarked. What is this sudden enthusiasm about chemistry, Ida?
Oh, I am trying to live up to Mrs. Westmacott's teaching.
Quite right, said he, though perhaps with less heartiness than he had shown the day before. Ah, here is breakfast at last. But nothing was comfortable that morning. There were eggs without egg spoons, toast, which was leathery from being kept dried-up rashers, and grounds in the coffee. Above all, there was that dreadful smell which pervaded everything and gave a horrible twang to every mouthful. I don't wish to put a damper upon your studies, Ida, said the doctor as he pushed back his chair, but I do think it would be better if you did your chemical experiments a little later in the day.
But Mrs. Westmacott says that women should rise early and do their work before breakfast.
Then they should choose some other room besides the breakfast room. The doctor was becoming just a little ruffled. A turn in the open air would soothe him, he thought. Where are my boots? He asked. But they were not in their accustomed corner by the chair. Up and down he searched, while the three servants took up the quest, stooping and peeping under bookcases and drawers. Ida had returned to her studies, and Clara to her blue-covered volume, sitting absorbed and disinterested amid the bustle and the racket. At last a general buzz of congratulation announced that the cook had discovered the boots hung up among the hats in the hall. The doctor, very red and flustered, drew them on, and stamped off to join the Admiral in his morning walk. As the door slammed, Ida burst out into a shout of laughter.
You see, Clara, she cried, the charm works already. He has gone to number 1 instead of to number 3. Oh, we shall win a great victory. You've been very good, dear. I could see that you were on thorns to help him when he was looking for his boots. Poor Papa! It is so cruel! And yet, what are we to do? Oh, he will enjoy being comfortable all the more if we give him a little discomfort now. What horrible work this chemistry is! Look at my frock. It is ruined, and this dreadful smell.
She threw open the window and thrust her little golden-curled head out of it. Charles Westmacott was hoeing at the other side of the garden.
Good morning, sir, said Ida.
Good morning! The big man leaned upon his hoe and looked up at her.
Have you any cigarettes, Charles?
Yes, certainly.
Throw me up, too.
Here is my case. Can you catch? A sealskin case came with a soft thud onto the floor. Ida opened it. It was full.
What are these?
She asked. Egyptians.
What are some other brands?
Oh, Richmond Gems and Turkish and Cambridge. But why?
Never mind.
She nodded to him and closed the window.
We must remember all those, Clara, said she. We must learn to talk about such things. Mrs. Westmacott knows all about the brands of cigarettes. Has your run come? Yes, dear, it is here. And I have my stout. Come along to my room now. This smell is too abominable, but we must be ready for him when he comes back. If we sit at the window, we shall see him coming down the road.
The fresh morning air and the genial company of the Admiral had caused the doctor to forget his troubles, and he came back about midday in an excellent humor. As he opened the hall door, the vile smell of chemicals which had spoiled his breakfast met him with a redoubled virulence. He threw open the hall window, entered the dining-room, and stood aghast at the sight which met his eyes. Ida was still sitting among her bottles, with a lit cigarette in her left hand and a glass of stout on the table beside her. Clara, with another cigarette, was lounging in the easy-chair with several maps spread out upon the floor. Her feet were stuck up on the coal-scuttle, and she had a tumblerful of some reddish-brown composition on the smoking-table close at her elbow.
The doctor gazed from one to the other of them through the thin grey haze of smoke. Beyond the City, by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 10. Women of the Future. From that day the doctor's peace was gone. Never was a quiet and orderly household transformed so suddenly into a bear garden, or a happy man turned into such a completely miserable one. He had never realized before how entirely his daughters had shielded him from all the friction of life. Now that they had not only ceased to protect him, but had themselves become a source of trouble to him, he began to understand how great the blessing was which he had enjoyed, and to sigh for the happy days before his girls had come under the influence of his neighbor. "You don't look happy," Mrs. Westmacott had remarked to him one morning. "You are pale and a little off color. You should come with me for a 10-mile spin upon the Tandem." "I am troubled about my girls." They were walking up and down in the garden. From time to time there sounded from the house behind them the long, sad wail of a French horn. "That is Ida," said he. "She has taken to practicing on that dreadful instrument in the intervals of her chemistry. And Clara is quite as bad. I declare it is getting quite unendurable." "Ah, doctor, doctor," she cried, shaking her forefinger with a gleam of her white teeth. "You must live up to your principles. You must give your daughters the same liberty as you advocate for other women." "Liberty, madam, certainly. But this approaches to license." "The same law for all, my friend." She tapped him reprovingly on the arm with her sunshade. "When you were 20, your father did not, I presume, object to your learning chemistry or playing a musical instrument? You would have thought it tyranny if he had." "But there is a sudden change in them both." "Yes, I have noticed that they have been very enthusiastic lately in the cause of liberty. Of all my disciples, I think that they promise to be the most devoted and consistent, which is the more natural since their father is one of our most trusted champions." The doctor gave a twitch of impatience. "I seem to have lost all authority," he cried. No, my dear friend. They are a little exuberant at having broken the trammels of custom, that is all." "You cannot think what I have had to put up with, madam. It has been a dreadful experience. Last night, after I had extinguished the candle in my bedroom, I placed my foot upon something smooth and hard, which scuttled from under me. Imagine my horror. I lit the gas and came upon a well-grown tortoise, which Clara had thought fit to introduce into the house. I call it a filthy custom to have such pets." Mrs. Westmacott dropped a little curtsy. "Thank you, sir," said she. "That is a nice little side hit at my poor Eliza." "I give you my word that I had forgotten about her," cried the doctor, flushing. "One such pet may no doubt be endured, but two are more than I can bear. Ida has a monkey which lives on the curtain rod. It is a most dreadful creature. It will remain absolutely motionless until it sees that you have forgotten its presence, and then it will suddenly bound from picture to picture all around the walls, and by swinging down on the bell rope and jumping on top of your head. At breakfast, it stole a poached egg and daubed it all over the door handle. Ida calls these outrages amusing tricks." Oh, it will come all right," said the widow reassuringly. "And Clara's as bad. Clara, who used to be so good and sweet, the very image of her poor mother. She insists upon this preposterous scheme of being a pilot, and will talk of nothing but revolving lights and hidden rocks, and codes of signals and nonsense of the kind." "But why preposterous?" asked his companion. "What nobler occupation can there be than that of stimulating commerce, and aiding the mariner to steer safely into port? I should think your daughter admirably adapted for such duties." "Then I must beg to differ from you, madam." "Still, you're inconsistent." "Excuse me, madam. I do not see the matter in the same light, and I should be obliged to you if you would use your influence with my daughter to dissuade her." You wish to make me inconsistent too?" "Then you refuse?" "I am afraid that I cannot interfere." The doctor was very angry. "Very well, madam," said he. "In that case, I can only say that I have the honor to wish you a very good morning." He raised his broad straw hat and strode away up the gravel path, while the widow looked after him with twinkling eyes.
She was surprised herself to find that she liked the doctor better the more masculine and aggressive he became. It was unreasonable and against all principle, and yet so it was, and no argument could mend the matter. Very hot and angry, the doctor retired into his room and sat down to read his paper. Ida had retired, and the distant wails of the bugle showed that she was upstairs in her boudoir. Clara sat opposite to him with her exasperating charts in her blue book. The doctor glanced at her, and his eyes remained fixed in astonishment upon the front of her skirt. "My dear Clara," he cried, "you have torn your skirt!" His daughter laughed and smoothed out her frock. To his horror, he saw the red plush of the chair where the dress ought to have been. "It is all torn!" he cried. "What have you done?"
"My dear papa," said she, "what do you know about the mysteries of ladies' dress? This is a divided skirt."
Then he saw that it was indeed so arranged, and that his daughter was clad in a sort of loose, extremely long knickerbockers.
"It will be so convenient for my sea boots,"
she explained. Her father shook his head sadly. "Your dear mother would not have liked it, Clara," said he. For a moment the conspiracy was upon the point of collapsing. There was something in the gentleness of his rebuke and in his appeal to her mother which brought the tears to her eyes, and in another instant she would have been kneeling beside him with everything confessed, when the door flew open and her sister Ida came bounding into the room. She wore a short grey skirt, like that of Mrs. Westmacott, and she held it up in each hand and danced about among the furniture.
"I feel quite a gaiety girl," she cried. "How delicious it must be to be upon the stage! You can't think how nice this dress is, Papa. One feels so free in it. And isn't it Clara charming?"
"Go to your room this instant and take it off!" thundered the doctor. "I call it highly improper, and no daughter of mine shall wear it."
"Papa, improper? Why, it is the exact model of Mrs. Westmacott's."
"I say it is improper, and yours also, Clara. Your conduct is really outrageous. You drive me out of this house. I am going to my club in town. I have no comfort or peace of mind in my own house. I will stand it no longer. I may be late tonight. I shall go to the British medical meeting, but when I return, I shall hope to find that you have reconsidered your conduct, and that you have shaken yourself clear of the pernicious influences which have recently made such an alteration in your conduct." He seized his hat, slammed the dining-room door, and a few minutes later they heard the crash of the big front gate.
"Victory, Clara, victory!"
cried Ida, still pirouetting around the furniture.
"Did you hear what he said? Pernicious influences! Don't you understand, Clara? Why do you sit there so pale and glum? Why don't you get up and dance? Oh, I shall be so glad when it is over, Ida. I do hate to give him pain. Surely he has learned now it is very unpleasant to spend one's life with reformers. He has almost learned it, Clara. Just one more little lesson. We must not risk all at this last moment. What would you do, Ida? Oh, don't do anything too dreadful. I feel that we have gone too far already. Oh, we can do it very nicely. You see, we are both engaged, and that makes it very easy. Harold will do what you ask him, especially as you have told him the reason why, and my Charles will do it without even wanting to know the reason. Now, you know what Mrs. Westmacott thinks about the reserve of these young ladies. Mere prudery, affectation, and the relic of the dark ages of the Zenana. Those were her words, were they not? What then? Well, now we must put it in practice. We are reducing all her other views to practice, and we must not shirk this one. But what would you do? Oh, don't look so wicked, Ida. You look like some evil little fairy, with your golden hair and dancing mischievous eyes. I know that you are going to propose something dreadful. We must give a little supper tonight. We? A supper? Why not? Young gentlemen give suppers. Why not young ladies? But whom shall we invite? Why, Harold and Charles, of course. And the Admiral and Mrs. Hay Denver? Oh, no, that would be very old-fashioned. We must keep up with the times, Clara. But what can we give them for supper? Oh, something with a nice, fast, rollicking, late-at-night kind of flavor to it. Let me see. Champagne, of course. And oysters. Oysters will do. In the novels, all the naughty people take champagne and oysters. Besides, they won't need any cooking. How was your pocket money, Clara? I have £3. And I have £4. I have no idea how much champagne costs.
Have you? Not the slightest. How many oysters does a man eat? I can't imagine. I'll write and ask Charles. No, I won't. I'll ask Jane. Ring for her, Clara. She has been a cook and is sure to know.
Jane, on being cross-questioned, refused to commit herself beyond the statement that it depended upon the gentleman, and also upon the oysters. The united experience of the kitchen, however, testified that 3 dozen was a fair provision.
Then we shall have 8 dozen, altogether,
said Ida, jotting down all her requirements upon a sheet of paper.
And 2 pints of champagne, and some brown bread and vinegar and pepper. That's all, I think. Is it not so very difficult to give a supper after all, is it, Clara? I don't like it, Ida. It seems to me to be very indelicate. But it is needed to clinch the matter. No, there is no drawing back now, Clara, or we shall ruin everything. Papa is sure to come back by 9:45. He will reach the door at 10. We must have everything ready for him. Now, just sit down at once, and ask Harold to come at 9 o'clock, and I shall do the same to Charles.
The 2 invitations were dispatched, received, and accepted. Harold was already a confidant, and he understood that this was some further development of the plot. As to Charles, he was so accustomed to feminine eccentricity, in the person of his aunt, that the only thing which could surprise him would be a rigid observance of etiquette. At 9 o'clock they entered the dining room of number 2, to find the master of the house absent, a red-shaded lamp, a snowy cloth, a pleasant little feast, and the 2 whom they would have chosen as their companions. A merrier party never met, and the house rang with their laughter and their chatter.
"It is 3 minutes to 10,
cried Clara, suddenly glancing at the clock.
"Good gracious, so it is. Now for our little tableau."
Ida pushed the champagne bottles obtrusively forward, in the direction of the door, and scattered oyster shells all over the cloth.
"Have you your pipe, Charles?"
"My pipe? Yes."
"Then please smoke it. Now don't argue about it, but do it, for you will ruin the effect otherwise."
The large man drew out a red case, and extracted a great yellow meerschaum, out of which, a moment later, he was puffing thick wreaths of smoke. Harold had lit a cigar, and both the girls had cigarettes.
"That looks very nice and emancipated," said Ida, glancing around. "Now I shall lie on the sofa. So, now, Charles, just sit there and throw your arm carelessly over the back of the sofa. No, don't stop smoking. I like it. Clara, dear, put your feet upon the coal scuttle, and do try to look a little dissipated. I wish we could crown ourselves with flowers. There are some lettuces on the sideboard. Oh, dear, here he is. I hear his key."
She began to sing in her high, fresh voice, a little snatch from a French song with a swinging tra-la-la chorus. The doctor had walked home from the station in a peaceable and relenting frame of mind, feeling that perhaps he had said too much in the morning, that his daughters had for years been models in every way, and that, if there had been any change of late, it was, as they said themselves, on account of their anxiety to follow his advice and to imitate Mrs. Westmacott. He could see clearly enough now that the advice was unwise, and that a world peopled with Mrs. Westmacotts would not be a happy or a soothing one. It was he who was himself to blame, and he was grieved by the thought that perhaps his hot words had troubled and saddened his 2 girls. This fear, however, was soon dissipated. As he entered his hall, he heard the voice of Ida uplifted in a rollicking ditty, and a very strong smell of tobacco was borne to his nostrils. He threw open the dining-room door, and stood aghast at the scene which met his eyes. The room was full of the blue wreaths of smoke, and the lamplight shone through the thin haze upon gold-topped bottles, plates, napkins, and a litter of oyster shells and cigarettes. Ida, flushed and excited, was reclining upon the settee, a wine-glass at her elbow and a cigarette between her fingers, while Charles Westmacott sat beside her, with his arm thrown over the head of the sofa with a suggestion of a caress. On the other side of the room, Clara was lounging in an armchair, with Harold beside her, both smoking, and both with wine-glasses beside them. The doctor stood speechless in the doorway, staring at the bacchanalian scene.
"Come in, Papa, do!" cried Ida. "Won't you have a glass of champagne?"
"Pray excuse me," said her father coldly. "I feel that I am intruding. I did not know that you were entertaining. Perhaps you will kindly let me know when you have finished. You will find me in my study."
He ignored the 2 young men completely, and closing the door, retired, deeply hurt and mortified, to his room.
A quarter of an hour afterwards, he heard the door slam, and his two daughters came to announce that the guests were gone.
Guests? Whose guests? He cried angrily. What is the meaning of this exhibition?
We have been giving a little supper, Papa. They were our guests.
Oh, indeed, the doctor laughed sarcastically. You think it right, then, to entertain young bachelors late at night, to smoke and drink with them, to... Oh, that I should ever have lived to blush for my own daughters. I thank God that your dear mother never saw the day.
Dearest Papa, cried Clara, throwing her arms about him, do not be angry with us. If you understood it all, you would see that there is no harm in it.
No harm, miss. Who is the best judge of that?
Mrs. Westmacott, suggested Ida, slyly.
The doctor sprang from his chair. Confound Mrs. Westmacott! He cried, striking frenziedly into the air with his hands. Am I to hear of nothing but this woman? Is she to confront me at every turn? I will endure it no longer.
But it was your wish, Papa.
Then I will tell you now what my second and wiser wish is, and we shall see if you will obey it as you have the first.
Of course we will, Papa.
Then my wish is that you should forget these odious notions which you have imbibed, that you should dress and act as you used to do before ever you saw this woman, and that, in future, you confine your intercourse with her to such civilities as are necessary between neighbours.
We are to give up Mrs. Westmacott?
Oh, give up me.
Oh, dear Dad, how can you say anything so cruel? Cried Ida, burrowing her tousy golden hair into her father's shirt front, while Clara pressed her cheek against his whisker. Of course we shall give her up if you prefer it. Of course we shall, Papa.
The doctor patted the two caressing heads. These are my own two girls again, he cried. It has been my fault as much as yours. I have been astray, and you have followed me in my error. I was only by seeing your mistake that I have become conscious of my own. Let us set it aside, and neither say nor think anything more about it.
End of chapter. Read by Fadi Akhtar for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. Beyond the City by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 11, A Blot from the Blue. So by the cleverness of two girls, a dark cloud was thinned away and turned into sunshine. Over one of them, alas, another cloud was gathering, which could not be so easily dispersed. Of these three households which fate had thrown together, two had already been united by ties of love. It was destined, however, that a bond of another sort should connect the Westmacotts with the Hay Denvers. Between the Admiral and the widow, a very cordial feeling had existed since the day when the old seaman had hauled down his flag and changed his opinions, granting to the yachtswoman all that he had refused to the reformer. His own frank and downright nature respected the same qualities in his neighbor, and a friendship sprang up between them which was more like that which exists between two men, founded upon esteem and a community of tastes. "By the way, Admiral," said Mrs. Westmacott one morning, as they walked together down to the station, "I understand that this boy of yours, in the intervals of paying his devotions to Miss Walker, is doing something upon change."
Yes, ma'am, and there is no man of his age who is doing so well. He is drawing ahead, and I can tell you, ma'am, some of those that started with him are hull down astern now. He touched his 500 last year, and before he's 30 he'll be making the four figures.
"The reason I asked is that I have small investments to make from time to time, and my present broker is a rascal. I should be very glad to do it through your son."
"It is very kind of you, ma'am. His partner is away on a holiday, and Harold would like to push on a bit and show what he can do. You know the poop isn't big enough to hold a lieutenant when the skipper's on shore."
"I suppose he charges the usual 0.5%.
"Don't know, I'm sure, ma'am. I'll swear that he does what is right and proper."
"That is what I usually pay, 10 shillings in the £100. If you see him before I do, just ask him to get me 5,000 in New Zealands. It is at 4 just now, and I fancy it may rise."
5,000! exclaimed the Admiral, reckoning it in his own mind. "Let me see. That's £25 commission. A nice day's work, upon my word. It is a very handsome order, ma'am."
"Well, I must pay someone, and why not him?"
"I'll tell him.
and I'm sure he'll lose no time. Oh, there is no great hurry. By the way, I understand from what you said just now that he has a partner. Yes, my boy is the junior partner. Pearson is the senior. I was introduced to him years ago, and he offered Harold the opening. Of course, we had a pretty stiff premium to pay. Mrs. Westmacott had stopped, and was standing very stiffly with her red Indian face even grimmer than usual. "Pearson?" said she. "Jeremiah Pearson?" "The same." "Then it's all off," she cried. "You need not carry out that investment." "Very well, ma'am." They walked on together, side by side, she brooding over some thought of her own, and he a little crossed and disappointed at her caprice and the lost commission for Harold. "I'll tell you what, Admiral," she exclaimed suddenly. "If I were you, I should get your boy out of this partnership." "But why, madam?" "Because he is tied to one of the deepest, slyest foxes in the whole city of London." "Jeremiah Pearson, ma'am. What can you know of him? He bears a good name." "No one in this world knows Jeremiah Pearson as I know him, Admiral. I warn you because I have a friendly feeling both for you and for your son. The man is a rogue, and you had best avoid him." "But these are only words, ma'am. Do you tell me that you know him better than the brokers and jobbers in the city?" "Man," cried Mrs. Westmacott, "will you allow that I know him when I tell you that my maiden name was Ada Pearson, and that Jeremiah is my only brother?" The Admiral whistled. Cried he. "Now that I think of it, there is a likeness." "He is a man of iron, Admiral, a man without a heart. I should shock you if I were to tell you what I have endured from my brother. My father's wealth was divided equally between us. His own share he ran through in 5 years, and he has tried since then by every trick of a cunning, low-minded man, by base cajolery, by legal quibbles, by brutal intimidation, to juggle me out of my share as well. There is no villainy of which the man is not capable. Oh, I know my brother Jeremiah. I know him, and I am prepared for him." "This is all new to me, ma'am. 'Pon my word, I hardly know what to say to it. I thank you for having spoken so plainly. From what you say, this is a poor sort of a consort for a man to sail with. Perhaps Harold would do well to cut himself adrift." "Without losing a day." "Well, we shall talk it over. You may be sure of that. But here we are at the station, so I will just see you into your carriage and then home to see what my wife says to the matter." As he trudged homewards, thoughtful and perplexed, he was surprised to hear a shout behind him, and to see Harold running down the road after him. "Why, Dad," he cried, "I have just come home from town, and the first thing I saw was your back as you marched away. But you are such a quick walker that I had to run to catch you." The Admiral's smile of pleasure had broken his stern face into 1,000 wrinkles. "You are early today," said he. "Yes, I wanted to consult you." "Nothing wrong?" "Oh, no, only an inconvenience." "What is it, then?" "How much have we in our private account?" "Pretty fair. Some 800, I think." "Oh, half that will be ample. I was rather thoughtless of Pearson." "What then?" "Well, you see, Dad, when he went away upon his little holiday to Havre, he left me to pay accounts and so on. He told me that there was enough at the bank for all claims. I had occasion on Tuesday to pay away 2 cheques, one for £80 and the other for £120, and here they are returned with a bank notice that we have already overdrawn to the extent of some hundreds." The Admiral looked very grave. "What's the meaning of that, then?" he asked. "Oh, it can easily be set right. You see, Pearson invests all the spare capital and keeps as small a margin as possible at the bank. Still, it was too bad for him to allow me even to run a risk of having a cheque returned. I have written to him and demanded his authority to sell out some stock, and I've written an explanation to these people. In the meantime, however, I have had to issue several cheques, so I'd better transfer part of our private account to meet them." "Quite so, my boy. All that's mine is yours. But who do you think this Pearson is?" "He is Mrs. Westmacott's brother." "Really? What a singular thing! Well, I can see a likeness now that you mention it. They have both the same hard type of face."
"She has been warning me against him. Says he is the rankest pirate in London. I hope that is all right, boy, and that we may not find ourselves in broken water."
Harold had turned a little pale as he heard Mrs. Westmacott's opinion of his senior partner. It gave shape and substance to certain vague fears and suspicions of his own, which had been pushed back as often as they obtruded themselves as being too monstrous and fantastic for belief. "He's a well-known man in the city, Dad," said he.
Of course he is, of course he is. That is what I told her. They would have found him out if anything had been amiss with him. Bless you, there's nothing so bitter as a family quarrel. Still, it is just as well that you have written about this affair, for we may as well have all fair and above board."
But Harold's letter to his partner was crossed by a letter from his partner to Harold. It lay awaiting him upon the breakfast table next morning, and it sent the heart into his mouth as he read it, and caused him to spring up from his chair with a white face and staring eyes.
My boy! My boy!
"I am ruined, Mother! Ruined!" He stood gazing wildly in front of him, while the sheet of paper fluttered down on the carpet. Then he dropped back into the chair and sank his face into his hands. His mother had her arms round him in an instant, while the Admiral, with shaking fingers, picked up the letter from the floor and adjusted his glasses to read it. "My dear Denver," it ran, "by the time that this reaches you, I shall be out of the reach of yourself or of anyone else who may desire an interview. You need not search for me, for I assure you that this letter is posted by a friend, and that you will have your trouble in vain if you try to find me. I am sorry to leave you in such a tight place, but one or other of us must be squeezed, and on the whole I prefer that it should be you. You'll find nothing in the bank and about £13,000 unaccounted for. I'm not sure that the best thing you can do is not to realize what you can and imitate your senior's example. If you act at once, you may get clean away. If not, it's not only that you must put up your shutters, but I am afraid that this missing money could hardly be included as an ordinary debt, and of course you are legally responsible for it just as much as I am. Take a friend's advice and get to America. A young man with brains can always do something out there, and you can live down this little mischance. It will be a cheap lesson if it teaches you to take nothing upon trust in business, and to insist upon knowing exactly what your partner is doing, however senior he may be to you. Yours faithfully, Jeremiah Pearson."
"Great heavens!" groaned the Admiral. "He has absconded!"
"And left me both a bankrupt and a thief." "No, no, Harold," sobbed his mother. "All will be right. What matter about money?" "Mother, money! It is my honor."
"The boy is right. It is his honor and my honor, for his is mine. This is a sore trouble, Mother, when we thought our life's troubles were all behind us. But we will bear it as we have borne others."
He held out his stringy hand, and the two old folk sat with bowed gray heads, their fingers intertwined, strong in each other's love and sympathy. "We were too happy," she sighed.
"But it is God's will, Mother."
"Yes, John, it is God's will."
"And yet it is bitter to bear. I could have lost all, the house, money, rank. I could have borne it. But at my age, my honor, the honor of an admiral of the fleet."
"No honor can be lost, John, when no dishonor has been done. What have you done? What has Harold done? There is no question of honor." The old man shook his head, but Harold had already called together his clear practical sense, which for an instant in the presence of this frightful blow had deserted him. "The mater is right, Dad," said he. "It is bad enough. Heaven knows, but we must not take too dark a view of it. After all, this insolent letter is in itself evidence that I had nothing to do with the schemes of the base villain who wrote it."
"They may think it prearranged."
"They could not. My whole life cries out against the thought. They could not look me in the face and entertain it."
"No, boy, not if they have eyes in their heads," cried the Admiral,
plucking up courage at the sight of the flashing eyes and brave, defiant face.
"We have the letter, and we have your character. We'll weather it yet between them. It's my fault from the beginning for choosing such a land shark for your consort. God help me, I thought I was finding such an opening for you."
"Dear Dad, how could you possibly know? As he says in his letter, it has given me a lesson. But he was so much older and so much more experienced that it was hard for me to ask to examine his books. But we must waste no time. I must go to the city.
What will you do?
What an honest man should do. I will write to all our clients and creditors, assemble them, lay the whole matter before them, and read them the letter and put myself absolutely in their hands.
That's it, boy. Yard arm to yard arm, and have it over.
I must go at once. He put on his topcoat and his hat. But I have 10 minutes yet before I can catch a train. There is one little thing which I must do before I start. He had caught sight through the long glass-folding door of the gleam of a white blouse and a straw hat in the tennis ground. Clara used often to meet him there of a morning to say a few words before he hurried off into the city. He walked out now with the quick, firm step of a man who has taken a momentous resolution, but his face was haggard and his lips pale. "Clara," said he, as she came towards him with words of greeting, "I am sorry to bring ill news to you, but things have gone wrong in the city, and I think that I ought to release you from your engagement." Clara stared at him with her great questioning dark eyes, and her face became pale as his. "How can the city affect you and me, Harold?" "It is dishonor. I cannot ask you to share it." "Dishonor? The loss of some miserable gold and silver coins!" "Oh, Clara, if it were only that, we could be far happier together in a little cottage in the country than with all the riches of the city. Poverty could not cut me to the heart, as I have been cut this morning. Why, it is but 20 minutes since I had the letter, Clara, and it seems to me to be some old thing which happened far away in my past life, some horrid black cloud which shut out all the freshness and the peace from it." "But what is it, then? What do you fear worse than poverty?" "To have debts that I cannot meet, to be hammered upon change and declared bankrupt, to know that others have just claim upon me, and to feel that I dare not meet their eyes. Is not that worse than poverty?" "Yes, Harold, 1,000-fold worse. But all this may be got over. Is there nothing more?" "My partner has fled and left me responsible for heavy debts, and in such a position that I may be required by the law to produce some at least of this missing money. It has been confided to him to invest, and he has embezzled it. I, as his partner, am liable for it. I have brought misery on all whom I love, my father, my mother. But you at least shall not be under the shadow. You are free, Clara. There is no tie between us." "It takes two to make such a tie, Harold," said she, smiling and putting her hand inside his arm. "It takes two to make it, dear, and also two to break it." "Is that the way they do business in the city, sir? That the man can always at his own sweet tear up his engagement?" "You hold me to it, Clara." "No creditor so remorseless as I, Harold. Never, never shall you get from that bond." "But I am ruined. My whole life is blasted." "And so you wish to ruin me, and blast my life also? No, indeed, sir, you shall not get away so lightly. But seriously now, Harold, you would hurt me if it were not so absurd. You think that a woman's love is like this sunshade which I carry in my hand, a thing only fitted for the sunshine, and of no use when the winds blow and the clouds gather?" "I would not drag you down, Clara." "Should I not be dragged down indeed if I left your side at such a time? It is only now that I can be of use to you, help you, sustain you. You have always been so strong, so above me. You are strong still, but then two will be stronger. Besides, sir, you have no idea what a woman of business I am. Papa says so, and he knows." Harold tried to speak, but his heart was too full. He could only press the white hand which curled round his sleeve. She walked up and down by his side, prattling merrily and sending little gleams of cheeriness through the gloom which girt him in. To listen to her he might have thought that it was Ida, and not her staid and demure sister who was chatting to him. "It will soon be cleared up," she said, "and then we shall feel quite dull. Of course, all business men have these little ups and downs. Why, I suppose of all men you meet upon change, there is not one who has not some such story to tell. If everything was always smooth, you know, then of course everyone would turn stockbroker, and you would have to hold your meetings in Hyde Park. How much is it then that you need?" "More than I can ever get. Not less than £13,000. Clara's face fell as she heard the amount. What do you propose doing? I shall go to the city now. I shall ask all our creditors to meet me tomorrow. I shall read them Pearson's letter and put myself into their hands. And they... what will they do? What can they do? They will serve writs for their money, and the firm will be declared bankrupt. And the meeting will be tomorrow, you say? Will you take my advice? What is it, Clara? To ask them for a few days of delay. Who knows what new turn matters may take? What turn can they take? I have no means of raising the money. Let us have a few days. Oh, we should have that in the ordinary course of business. The legal formalities would take them some little time. But I must go, Clara. I must not seem to shirk. My place now must be at my offices. Yes, dear, you are right. God bless you and guard you. I shall be here in the wilderness, but all day I shall be by your office table at Throgmorton Street in spirit. And if ever you should be sad, you will hear my little whisper in your ear, and know that there is one client whom you will never be able to get rid of. Never, as long as we both live, dear.
End of chapter. Read by Fadi Akhtar for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu.